You corrected my order. Ethan Caldwell's voice dropped to something quiet and ugly. In front of all these people, Victoria didn't see the hand coming. The slap hit her so hard she stumbled into the counter coffee pot, clanging against the linoleum. The entire diner freezing in the kind of silence that follows something that can't be taken back. Her cheek burned, her ears rang, and every single person in that room looked away. Every person except one. A gray-bearded man in the corner set down his mug, slowly, like he had all the time in the world. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The diner was called Maze, and it had been sitting on Route 9 at the edge of Silver Creek, Montana for 31 years. The booths were cracked vinyl patched with electrical tape. The coffee was always slightly too strong. The pie was genuinely good. It was the kind of place where truckers stopped, where farmers came in after early morning runs, where locals knew each other's orders and the waitstaff knew which regulars needed a refill before they asked. Victoria Dawson had worked the Sunday morning shift at Maze for 4 years. She was 28 years old, blonde, with the kind of careful politeness that came not from weakness but from hard experience. She had learned early that the world was not particularly interested in what she needed, and so she had developed a way of moving through it that was efficient and quiet and designed to attract as little friction as possible. She showed up on time. She remembered orders. She smiled at people who didn't smile back. She counted her tips at the end of each shift and drove home in a car with a cracked windshield and felt grateful for the day. She had been supporting herself since she was 22. Her mother had passed 6 years earlier after a long illness that ate through every dollar they had. Her father had walked out when she was 9. She had no siblings. She had learned to need very little from other people because other people had demonstrated consistently that they were not reliable sources of what she needed. But she loved the Sunday shift. Sunday mornings brought in a particular kind of crowd. Quieter, families coming back from church, farmers in clean shirts, old men reading newspapers. She liked the rhythm of it. The coffee ran fast, the orders were simple. By 11, the rush was done, and she could breathe. That particular Sunday started exactly the same as every other Sunday. And then Ethan Caldwell walked in. She knew who he was. Everyone in Silver Creek knew who Ethan Caldwell was. He was 47 years old and had made his first serious money in real estate development, parlaying a modest family inheritance into a portfolio that now covered half the commercial property in the county. He owned the Caldwell Building downtown. He owned 3 of the 5 strip malls on the main corridor. He had his name on a hospital wing. He sat on the board of the Chamber of Commerce and the County Economic Development Committee and 2 bank boards, and it was generally understood that if you wanted anything significant to happen in Silver Creek, you needed Ethan Caldwell's blessing, or at minimum, his absence of opposition. He came in occasionally, not often. Maze was not the kind of establishment he usually patronized. He had an assistant who made reservations at the one upscale restaurant in the next county over a place with cloth napkins and a wine list. But every few months, he would come into Maze, usually when he wanted to be seen being a regular guy mixing with regular people. He would make a point of knowing the owner's name. He would tip reasonably and make sure people noticed. He came in that Sunday with 2 men. Victoria recognized as private security, both of them wearing the studied blankness of people paid to watch without being seen. They took a booth near the window. Ethan sat across from them, already on his phone, already running some conversation that was clearly more important than whatever was happening around him. Victoria went over and took the order. He wanted the breakfast plate: eggs scrambled, wheat toast, bacon, orange juice, coffee, black. The breakfast plate comes with white toast, she told him. But I can put in a note for wheat, just takes a minute longer. He didn't look up from his phone. I said wheat. I know, I just wanted to let you know it's a substitution so you're not waiting and wondering. That's fine. She put the order in. 12 minutes later, she brought it out. Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, bacon, coffee, orange juice. She set it down. He looked at the plate. I ordered sourdough. Victoria paused. She held the notepad she always kept in her apron pocket and looked at it even though she didn't need to. She had written it down. She had the word wheat in her own handwriting. Sir, you said wheat toast. I confirmed it. I said sourdough. I have it written down as wheat. The cook prepared wheat, If you'd like sourdough, I can absolutely— Are you calling me a liar? The table nearby went quiet. A man 2 booths over looked up from his newspaper. One of the security men shifted his weight. Victoria kept her voice even. I'm not calling you anything. I'm telling you what I have written down. I'd be happy to get you sourdough toast. It'll just take a few minutes. Ethan Caldwell put his phone on the table. He looked at her for the first time since she'd walked over. Not the way people look at waitstaff, which is usually that half-present glance that acknowledges their existence without really registering them as a person. He looked at her the way someone looks at something that has just become an inconvenience. Do you know who I am, Swasu? Yes, sir. Then you understand that I don't make mistakes about what I ordered. Victoria said nothing. The silence in the diner had spread. She could feel it without looking around. She could feel every person in the room becoming very still. Bring me sourdough toast, he said. And I want a fresh plate. This one's been sitting. The plate just came out of the kitchen. Did I ask for your opinion? She picked up the plate. She walked back toward the counter. She was not going to argue with him. She was not going to give him anything he could escalate. She knew this type. She had dealt with this type. You gave them nothing to push against, and they usually deflated. She put in the order for sourdough. She refreshed his coffee. She brought back the new toast when it came up, set it down quietly, didn't say anything additional. He looked at the toast. You touched it. She stared at him. I'm sorry. When you brought the first plate back, you touched the toast. Now you're bringing me toast from the same kitchen with the same hands. Sir, I handle food with my hands. That's how— Get the manager. I can get May. She's the owner. She's in the back. I said, get the manager. I don't want to talk to a waitress anymore. I'm through talking to you. Something in the diner shifted. It wasn't loud. It was more like the collective held breath of 30 people watching something play out and calculating the cost of getting involved. Victoria kept her expression neutral. She said, I'll get May, and turned around. That's when his hand came down on her wrist. Not a grab, more like a clamp. The kind of grip that didn't ask permission and didn't expect resistance. I'm not finished. She looked down at his hand on her wrist. She looked up at his face. Let go of me. You're going to stand there and tell me, let go of me right now. He released her wrist, but he stood up. And before she had processed what was happening, before her body had a chance to react, the back of his hand connected with her face. The sound was flat and loud in the small space. The coffee pot hit the floor. Victoria caught herself on the counter with both hands. The world briefly tilted her cheeks, screaming with heat. She could hear the sound of her own breathing. She straightened. She turned around. The diner was completely silent. 30-some people sat in their booths and at the counter, and not one of them moved. Not one of them spoke. A woman near the door had her hand over her mouth. A man with a newspaper had it folded on the table and was staring at the far wall, very deliberately, not making eye contact with anyone. Ethan Caldwell straightened his jacket. He sat back down. He picked up his phone. And from the corner booth, a chair scraped against the floor. Slow, deliberate, like someone who had decided something and saw no reason to rush the decision. Jackson Reed was 61 years old, 6'2", with a gray beard that he kept neat, and hands that had spent decades doing real physical work and still looked like it. He wore a leather vest over a dark shirt, and the patches on that vest meant something specific in a way that everyone in Silver Creek understood, even if they couldn't have named every detail of what they meant. He had been coming to May's on Sunday mornings for 11 years. He always sat in the corner booth. He always ordered 2 eggs over easy sausage links biscuit. He always tipped 30%, and he always thanked whoever served him by name. I was the president of the Silver Creek chapter of the Hells Angels. He was not a man people bought, not because people were afraid of him exactly, though some were, more because he carried himself with the particular quietness of someone who had made peace with who they were a long time ago and had no remaining interest in performing for anyone's approval. He walked toward Ethan's table. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Ethan looked up from his phone when Jackson's shadow fell across the table. He looked at the leather vest. He looked at the beard. His expression did the thing wealthy men's expressions do when they encounter someone they've categorized as beneath them. A brief flicker of recalibration, then the default return to dismissal. Something I can help you with, Ethan said. Jackson pulled a chair from the nearest empty table and set it down backward across from Ethan and sat in it with his forearms resting on the back. I want you to tell me, Jackson said, what she did. His voice was not loud. If anything, it was quieter than normal conversation. Every person in the diner heard it anyway. Excuse me, the woman, the waitress. I want you to tell me specifically what she did that made you decide you had the right to put your hand on her face. Ethan's jaw tightened. He glanced at his security, a quick side-eyed check of their position, and then back at Jackson. This doesn't involve you. That's interesting, Jackson said, because I watched it from over there and it looked like it involved everyone in the room. Every single person who's sitting here right now. So maybe you could help me understand. She was disrespectful. She told you what toast you ordered. She called me a liar. She read you what she had written down. Is that the same thing to you? Ethan set his phone on the table with a deliberate click. I don't know who you think you are. My name is Jackson Reed, Jackson said. People call me Grizzly. I've been coming to this diner for 11 years. That woman has brought me coffee and eggs almost every Sunday morning for 4 of those years. She has never been anything but kind and professional to me or anyone else I have ever seen her serve. And I just watched you hit her because she inconvenienced you. You need to walk away. I'll walk away when I'm ready. Something crossed Ethan Caldwell's face that wasn't quite anger. It was closer to the expression a man gets when he has applied a formula that has always worked before and is watching it fail to produce the expected result. He leaned forward. Do you understand what I own in this town? His voice dropped to something quieter and harder. Do you have any idea what I can do to you? To your club, I have lawyers on retainer who have nothing better to do than make people like you disappear. I have relationships with every law enforcement officer in this county. I make one call. Jackson looked at him without expression. Do you know what I've noticed, Jackson said, about men who talk like that? Ethan waited. They always lead with the threat. They always want you to know what they could do to you before you've even decided if you're a threat. That's not power talking. That's fear talking. He paused. Real power doesn't need to introduce itself. The silence in the diner was total now. The woman near the door had lowered her hand from her mouth, but she hadn't moved. The man with the newspaper was looking directly at Jackson now, unable to look away. Ethan Caldwell stood up. His security men stood with him. You just made a very serious mistake. Jackson stayed seated. He didn't turn to watch them leave. After the door swung shut, after the sound of expensive car doors in an engine that cost more than most people's annual salary faded down Route 9. Nobody moved for a moment. Then May, the owner who had come out from the back at some point and been standing at the edge of the kitchen doorway, walked over to Victoria, who was standing behind the counter with one hand pressed flat against the surface, holding herself steady. Honey, May said, sit down. I'm fine. Victoria. I'm fine, she said again, but her hand was shaking against the counter surface, and she couldn't quite make it stop. Jackson walked to the counter and sat down on the stool closest to her. He didn't say anything immediately. He signaled May for a refill on his coffee, and May brought 2 mugs, and she set one in front of Victoria without asking. Victoria looked at the mug, then she looked at Jackson. You shouldn't have done that, she said. Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it that wasn't. You don't know what he's capable of. I have a general idea. No. She shook her head. You don't. He's not just a man with money. He has... She stopped. She looked down at the mug. He has what? Jackson asked. She was quiet for a moment. You need to stay away from this. Whatever you think you did just now, whatever you think you helped with, you made it worse. For you and for me. He doesn't forget. He doesn't let things go. He will find a way to come back at both of us, and it will be worse than a slap. Jackson wrapped both hands around his mug. You sound like you're talking from experience. She didn't answer. Victoria. He waited until she looked at him. Is there something specific you're afraid of? Or is it general? She met his eyes. She held them for a long moment, and he could see something working behind her expression, some calculation, some weighing of costs. It's very specific, she said finally. Okay, he said, you don't have to tell me what it is, but I want you to know that whatever it is, you don't have to carry it the way you have been. Her jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. Maybe not. He drank his coffee, set the mug down. But I'm going to be at this counter next Sunday morning and the Sunday after that. Same as always. If you decide you want to talk, I'll be here. She looked at him for a moment that stretched. Then she picked up the coffee pot and went to refill the cup of the man with the newspaper because there was still a shift to finish and she knew how to finish things. But her hand had stopped shaking. And in the corner of her eye, she watched Jackson Reed leave the diner with the same unhurried steadiness he had used to cross it, get on a motorcycle that had been sitting in the lot, and pull out onto Route 9 without looking back. She didn't know then what she would tell him on Sunday. She didn't know yet whether she would tell him anything at all. But for the first time in 2 years of silence and careful invisibility, in performing the role of a woman who had nothing important to say, she thought about the documents in the fireproof box under her bed. She thought about the names on those documents. She thought about the properties. She thought about the families. And she thought about the fact that Ethan Caldwell had walked into a diner full of witnesses and hit her in the face because she had been getting too comfortable. Because he had looked at her lately and seen something in her posture, some micro shift, some change in the way she carried herself, and he had wanted to put it back, to remind her. He had made a mistake. She didn't know yet what she was going to do about it. But the thought was there now, fully formed and quiet and dangerous, in the way that real decisions are dangerous, not dramatic, not announced, just present. Ethan Caldwell had wanted to remind her what she was. What he had actually done was remind her what she had. May came and stood next to her at the counter and looked out at the diner where the 30-some people had slowly returned to their food and their conversations, the Sunday morning rhythm reasserting itself over the rupture. "You doing okay?" May asked. "Working on it," Victoria said. May nodded once. She put her hand on Victoria's shoulder for exactly 2 seconds. Then she went back to the kitchen. And Victoria Dawson refilled every cup in the diner and cleared every plate, and did it all with the careful efficiency she had spent years perfecting. But something had changed in the calibration of her silence. It was no longer the silence of hiding. It was the silence of someone who had finally decided what they were going to do. Jackson didn't go straight home after he left May's. He rode for a while, not because he was agitated. He had learned a long time ago how to keep agitation from taking the wheel, but because he needed to think, and thinking happened better when the road was moving under him and there was nothing else demanding his attention. He had seen a lot of things in his life. He had seen men do ugly things for reasons that made sense only inside the specific logic of their own entitlement. He had watched people get knocked down and stay down, not because they lacked strength, but because the weight on top of them was systemic and organized and had been carefully constructed to look like the natural order of things. But something about Victoria Dawson was sitting in him differently than the usual thing. It wasn't the slap itself, though. The slap was the kind of act that told you everything you needed to know about a man's character in under 2 seconds. It was the way she'd spoken after, the specificity of her fear. Most people, when they said, "You don't know what he's capable of," were speaking in generalities, the vague, reasonable terror of someone who has seen power flex and doesn't want to be in his way. Victoria hadn't sounded vague. She'd sounded like someone who had counted the exits. He pulled over at the gas station at the edge of town and made a call. The phone rang twice. "Yeah," said the voice on the other end. Danny Cortez, 34, who handled most of the chapter's information needs in the way that a man with a computer science degree and very few questions about how to apply it could. "I need everything public on Ethan Caldwell," Jackson said. "Business filings, property records, anything that's searchable. Can you have something for me by tonight?" "I can have something for you in 2 hours." "Good." He hung up and sat on the bike for a moment in the cold morning air, thinking about the way Victoria had said it's very specific. He drove back to the chapter house, which was a converted ranch property 6 miles outside of Silver Creek that the club had owned for 19 years. By the time he got there, 3 of his guys were in the main room. Hector, who was the club's sergeant-at-arms and had the build of a man who had spent 30 years doing things that required a large build. Tom Briggs, who everyone called Biscuit for reasons nobody clearly remembered anymore, and who was the club's treasurer. And a younger member named Cole, who was 26 and had been prospecting for the chapter before he was voted in, and who still had the habit of listening more than he spoke around the older members. Jackson told them what had happened. Hector's expression didn't change. He was the kind of man whose face had settled into permanent patience, which people who didn't know him sometimes mistook for blankness, in which people who did know him recognized as the particular patience of someone who had learned that events tended to clarify themselves if you waited long enough. Biscuit said Caldwell, the real estate guy. That one? He's got his fingers in everything around here. I know. President, Hector said. What are you thinking? Jackson sat down in the chair. He always sat in the one near the window and looked at the table for a moment. I'm thinking there's more to it. She wasn't scared the way people are scared of a guy with money and lawyers. She was scared like someone who's been sitting on something and knows it. Sitting on what? That's what I want to find out. Cole spoke up. You know her. Sunday mornings, 4 years, she's a good person. He paused. The kind of good that doesn't require an audience. Hector nodded slowly. What do you need? Right now I need information. Danny's pulling records. After that, he leaned back. After that, we'll see what the records say. The records said quite a bit. Danny arrived at the chapter house that evening with a laptop and a printed stack of documents. He spread them on the table in the main room and walked Jackson through them with the efficiency of someone who found this kind of thing genuinely interesting. Ethan Caldwell had started acquiring commercial property in Silver Creek about 12 years ago. Initially straightforward, he bought the old hardware store building downtown, converted it to office space, leased it to a law firm and 2 insurance companies. Reasonable? Normal. But around 8 years ago, the pattern shifted. The acquisitions started coming in clusters. Small business properties mostly. A mechanic's garage on the south side, a family-owned feed store, a dry cleaning business that had been operating for 22 years, a small apartment complex near the community college, a hardware store, a bakery, a barbershop. All of them sold in an 18-month window. All of them sold to different named buyers. Now here's the thing, Danny said, and turned the laptop to show a series of business registration documents. These buyers, 6 different company names, but if you trace the registration addresses and the registered agents, he pointed, same attorney on 4 of them, different names, same P.O. box on 3, and 2 of them share a phone number that traces back to an answering service in Helena. Jackson looked at the documents. Shell companies. Shell companies, Danny confirmed. Caldwell's buying his own town through proxies and making it look like normal market activity. Biscuit was leaning over the table now. That's not just shady. That's fraud. Securities fraud, possibly. Definitely violates disclosure requirements. How'd he get those owners to sell? Hector said. Danny pulled out another sheet. That's the thing I can't fully answer from public records. But I found 3 separate small claims filings in the last 5 years, all eventually dropped, all involving small business owners on that south corridor. One cites what he calls economic pressure from a neighboring development. One alleges that an inspection he believed was retaliatory suddenly found violations that cost him $60,000 to remediate or face closure. The room was quiet. He squeezes them, Jackson said. He finds whatever pressure point is available and he applies it until they sell. That's my read, Danny said. Jackson sat back. He thought about Victoria. He thought about what she had said. It's very specific, and about the way she'd looked at him with that weighing expression, that calculation of costs. She had worked for him. That's what it was, he realized now. She hadn't just witnessed something, she had been inside it. The next morning he drove to Mays before the Sunday crowd. Victoria came in through the back at 5:45 like always. She had her apron on by 6. Jackson was at the counter when she came out from the kitchen, and she stopped when she saw him. You're early, she said. Wanted to catch you before the rush. She looked at him for a moment, then went behind the counter and started the coffee. She kept her back to him while the machine ran. I pulled Caldwell's property records, he said. She didn't turn around. The shell companies, he continued, the clustering of acquisitions, the small business owners who sold under pressure and then disappeared from the public record. The coffee finished. She poured 2 mugs and set one in front of him and kept one for herself. She stood across the counter from him, both hands around her mug. What do you want from me? She asked. I want to understand what you know. Why? Because those people who sold their businesses, some of them are still in this town, trying to make it work. Some of them lost everything they spent 30 years building. And the man who took it from them walked into this diner yesterday and hit a woman in front of 30 witnesses and walked out like nothing would ever touch him. Something moved in her face. She controlled it quickly. And your solution is to do what exactly beat him up that won't do anything. He'll have his lawyers file charges before you get back on your bike. I'm not talking about beating him up. Then what? I'm talking about using what you have. The silence between them was different from the silence in the diner. This one was deliberate chosen. Victoria was making a decision in real time, and he could see it, the small tightening around her eyes, the way her grip shifted on the mug. You don't know what I have, she said carefully. You worked for him, Jackson said. 3 years ago, as an assistant, I'm guessing, in his accounting office or something adjacent to it. She went very still. I'm not guessing, he said. I asked May this morning. She's known you since you came to town. She remembered you'd had another job before you started here. Victoria set her mug down. She looked at the surface of the counter. May talks too much. She was worried about you. She doesn't need to be worried about me. Victoria. He waited until she looked at him. I've been sitting on this stool for 11 years watching this town. I know what healthy looks like, and I know what scared looks like. The slap yesterday wasn't the first time he's reached out and touched your life. That was a reminder. And you know what he was reminding you of. She was quiet for a long time. The diner was still empty. The morning light was the particular flat gray of early Montana in October, and outside on Route 9 a truck went by, and the coffee machine made a small settling sound. I worked for him for 14 months, she said finally, as an administrative assistant in his property management company. I handled correspondence, scheduled meetings, filed documents. I was good at it, I was organized, and I kept my mouth shut, and I didn't ask questions. She stopped. Jackson waited. About 9 months and I was filing quarterly reports and I found a folder that had been misfiled. It was in the wrong cabinet. I opened it because I thought it was something I needed to refile. She paused. It was a comparison document. 2 sets of books, basically. The internal accounting and the reported accounting for 3 different properties. Different numbers. Significantly different. But more than that, the internal documents showed correspondence between Caldwell and the registered agents of those companies. The shell companies, written instructions about how to time the offers, how to apply regulatory pressure, who to contact in the county inspector's office. She stopped again. She picked up her mug and put it back down without drinking. There was a name, a county official, with amounts. He was bribing an inspector. At minimum, possibly more people. The correspondence I saw referenced a judge by initials, though I couldn't. She stopped. I couldn't confirm that, but the initials were consistent with one judge who handles civil cases in this county, the same judge who dismissed 2 of the lawsuits filed against Caldwell in the last 4 years. The weight of what she was saying settled into the room. Jackson set his mug down carefully. You copied them. She met his eyes. I photographed everything in that folder with my phone. Then I refiled it exactly where it was and I went home and I got sick in my bathroom for 20 minutes. And then I backed everything up 3 times. And then you quit. 2 weeks later, I told him I had a family situation and needed to leave. He was gracious about it, very warm. He told me I'd done excellent work and that he hoped I'd be able to return when things settled. Her voice was level, but the level was doing real work. He sent flowers to my apartment. He knew. Not then, I don't think. But 4 months later, someone broke into my apartment. They didn't take anything, the television, my laptop, my jewelry, all there. But my filing cabinet had been gone through, very carefully, but I could tell. And 2 weeks after that, one of his men came to the coffee shop where I was working at the time. He sat at my table on my break. He told me that Ethan Caldwell was a man who valued loyalty, and that disloyalty had a way of catching up with people, and when it did, the consequences could be very difficult for someone with no family to fall back on. Jackson was very still. And then Caldwell himself called me. 2 days later, he didn't reference anything specific. He was warm, friendly. He asked how I was doing. He mentioned that he'd heard I was working a new job and hoped it was going well. He said he'd always believed in second chances and fresh starts. Her jaw tightened. He talked for 4 minutes and didn't say a single threatening thing, and by the end of the call, I couldn't breathe. You moved here after that, so I applied to Mays. I moved to a different part of town. I changed my phone number. I got a library card under a slightly different name for anything that I didn't want traced. She paused. And I put the copies somewhere safe, physical copies. And I held on to them because I didn't know what to do with them, and I was terrified to do anything with them, and also I couldn't make myself destroy them because... She stopped. Because they're proof, Jackson said. And some part of you always knew it wasn't over. Looked at him. Her eyes were dry. She was not a woman who let herself cry in front of people. He could see that clearly, but the effort of keeping the expression level was visible in the set of her mouth. He saw me 3 months ago, she said, at the hardware store on 5th. He was coming out, I was going in, we nearly walked into each other, and he smiled at me. Very pleasant, like running into an old colleague. She looked down at the counter. That was the first time in 2 years I'd seen him in person. And then yesterday he walked in here and it wasn't a coincidence. No, she said, it wasn't a coincidence. Jackson picked up his coffee and drank. He put the mug down and looked at her. How many copies do you have? She blinked slightly like the question surprised her. 3, one at my apartment, one in a safety deposit box at the credit union in Millhaven. One, she hesitated. One with a person I trust. Good, he nodded. That was smart. It hasn't done any good so far. It's done one very important thing, he said. It kept you alive. He's been careful because he's not certain what you have and he's not certain where it is. That uncertainty is the only leverage you've had for 2 years. And it's the reason you're sitting here talking to me instead of, he stopped. Instead of what, she said quietly. He didn't answer that directly. He didn't need to. They both understood what the end of that sentence was. The problem with what you have, Jackson said going forward, is that documents from a misfiled folder are complicated. Chain of custody questions. His lawyers would argue they were obtained improperly possibly, and without corroboration. I know, she said. I've thought about this for 2 years. I know exactly what the problems are. Then let me ask you something, he said. The business owners who sold, did any of them keep records of the pressure they were put under? The inspections, the communications, the specific sequence of events? She looked at him. Some of them would have to, for insurance purposes, tax purposes. They'd have to document the compliance costs, the violations. And if their accounts matched your documents, it would be corroboration. She said it slowly, like a word she'd been afraid to say. But they'd have to be willing to talk, and they'd have to not be afraid. That's my part, Jackson said. The not being afraid part. That's something I know how to help with. She looked at him for a long time. Outside Route 9 was waking up. A car turned into the lot. The first Sunday customer. Why are you doing this? She asked. He picked up his mug, drank the last of the coffee. 11 years at this counter, Victoria. I've watched this town get smaller every year. Not in population, in courage. That's what men like Caldwell actually steal. Not the land and the willingness to stand up. He set the mug down. I'm 61 years old and I'm tired of watching it happen. She looked at him for another moment. Then she reached under the counter and put the coffee pot down in front of him and refilled his mug without being asked. It was, he understood her version of yes. The week that followed was quieter on the surface than what had happened beneath it. Ethan Caldwell sent no direct message. No lawyers appeared. No men sat at Victoria's table during her break. But the chapter house was running on different rhythms now. And Jackson was moving through the week with the focused quiet of a man who was building something. Hector made contact with Ray Gutierrez first. Ray had owned the mechanics garage on the south side, the one in Danny's Records. He had owned it for 18 years. He was 53 now, working at a dealership 2 towns over, doing fine in the practical sense of the word. The way people who are practically competent always manage to do fine even after they have lost something significant. But fine and whole were different things, and the 2 years since he'd sold the garage had left a specific kind of residue that Ray hadn't been able to fully name. He named it pretty quickly when Hector sat down across from him at the dealership's service bay. They came after my permits, Ray said. He was wiping his hands on a shop rag that didn't need wiping, a nervous habit. The kind of physical motion men use when they're saying something that's been sitting inside them too long. I had a commercial vehicle permit that I'd had for 12 years. Never a problem. Then all of a sudden, the county's saying there's a zoning issue with my lot size. A zoning issue that had somehow not existed for 12 years. I hired an attorney, $3,000. The attorney tells me there's nothing wrong with my permit, but the county can drag the process out for 2 years easy, and in the meantime, I can't operate. And then someone made you an offer, Hector said. Ray stopped wiping his hands. A company called Pacific Rim Property Holdings, which I later found out doesn't exist in any form that I can locate. But at the time, I was looking at 2 years of legal fees and no operating income, and I had a lease coming due on my equipment, so he shook his head. So I sold. What did you get? 60% of what it was worth. He looked at his hands. I had a guy offer me full value 6 months earlier. Private buyer. I said no because I wasn't selling. 60%, 2 years of legal fights or nothing. That was the choice. Raylan Hector said, if someone came to you with documentation that showed the permit challenge was engineered, that there are records of communication between the people who filed the challenge and Ethan Caldwell's organization, would you be willing to sit down and give an account of what happened to you? Ray was quiet for a moment. He looked at Hector. What kind of sit down are we talking about? Federal investigators, Hector said. If it comes to that, another pause, longer. Yeah, Ray said. Yeah, I'd be willing to do that. It took 3 days to find 4 people who would say the same thing. Ray Gutierrez, the mechanic. Sandra Kim, who had owned the dry cleaning business for 22 years. A farmer named Paul Weaver, who had lost 40 acres of his family's land in what had been framed as a tax dispute. And an older man named Earl Hutchins, who had owned an apartment building that had been subjected to a sudden rash of code violations that appeared in the county records 6 weeks after he'd refused an initial offer to sell. 4 people, 4 different situations, 4 different types of pressure applied with different tools. But the same timing, the same sequence, the same outcome. Jackson sat with Victoria in her apartment on Thursday evening. The copies she had photographed spread on the table between them, and they went through each person's account against the documents. The matches were not incidental. The internal correspondence referenced permit challenges. It referenced inspection scheduling. It referenced, and this was the one that made Victoria's hands go still, a payment to a county official that was dated 11 days before Ray Gutierrez's permit challenge was filed. That's it, she said. She was looking at the document and looking at Ray's account, which Hector had written up in a straightforward 2-page summary. The timing, the payment, that's the link. That's the link, Jackson agreed. She looked up. This is enough to take somewhere. It's enough to take to the FBI's Helena field office, Jackson said. It's not a local matter anymore. It hasn't been a local matter for a while. It was just being treated like one because everyone involved lived locally, and the man with the most power lived locally, and that made it easy to contain. Victoria looked at the documents for a moment. Then she looked at him. He's going to know. Once I go to the FBI, there's no going back, Jackson said. No, there isn't. He'll come after me. He'll try. That's not reassuring. I know. He didn't soften it, didn't wrap it in a promise he couldn't keep. Here's what I can tell you. You've been alone with this for 2 years and it hasn't gotten safer. It's gotten less safe. The slap on Sunday wasn't a man being casually cruel. It was a man who was getting impatient, and an impatient man with power and a motive to silence someone is more dangerous than a patient one. She was quiet. The documents exist, he said. You can't make them not exist. You can't go back to before you found them. You've been trying to stay neutral in a situation where neutral doesn't protect you, and it never did. He paused. The only direction that has any safety in it is forward. She put both hands flat on the table. She looked at the documents. 2 years of wait. 2 years of carrying something that had no good place to be put down. I'll need a few days, she said. Okay. I need to make sure the safety deposit box is organized. I need to reach out to the person holding the 3rd copy. She stopped. She breathed. I need to prepare myself. Okay, he said again. She looked at him. And I need you to not go anywhere near Ethan Caldwell in the meantime. Nothing. No messages, no conversations, no. Agreed. Because if he gets spooked before I've talked to the investigators, Victoria, he waited. Agreed, I'm not going to do anything that puts this at risk. She held gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once. Small, decisive. Outside her apartment, the town of Silver Creek was running through its ordinary Thursday night. People were eating dinner, watching television, putting kids to bed. The Silver Creek that most of its residents saw was a normal enough small Montana town, a little quieter than it used to be, a little less economically diverse than it had been a decade ago, but basically fine, basically functioning. They didn't see what Jackson saw, which was a structure, a carefully maintained structure in which one man had spent years positioning himself at the center of every significant economic decision in the county, rewarding the people who helped him and methodically eliminating the ones who wouldn't be co-opted. A structure that depended entirely on each of its victims believing they were alone. But Ray Gutierrez didn't know about Sandra Kim. Sandra Kim didn't know about Paul Weaver. Paul Weaver didn't know about Earl Hutchins. And none of them had known about Victoria or what she was holding. They were alone because they'd been kept alone. Jackson drove back to the chapter house with the particular feeling of a man who had found the thing he was looking for. Not satisfaction, it was too early for satisfaction. But clarity, the clarity of knowing that the shape of the problem was now fully visible and the tools for addressing it were in hand. Biscuit was still up when he got back. He was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the look of a man who had done math he hadn't liked. "Tell me," Jackson said. "I talked to a contact at the county assessor's office," Biscuit said. "Off the record, she's been watching the property ownership shifts for 3 years and couldn't figure out why it felt wrong. Now she's got a reason to look harder." He paused. "Prez, if what you've got is what it looks like, the bribery piece, the shell company piece, the corroborated coercion, this man is looking at federal charges. RICO possibly if they can establish the pattern as organized." Jackson sat down. "That's what it looks like. He's going to fight it hard. He will. And the people willing to testify are going to need to be serious, because his legal team is going to come after every one of them. They know that." Biscuit looked at him. "You think she's ready?" Jackson thought about Victoria Dawson, 28 years old, 6 days a week at Mays, supporting herself on tips and careful living, 2 years of carrying something enormous in a fireproof box under her bed. He thought about the way she said, "I need to prepare myself not as a retreat, but as a protocol," the way someone talks when they know exactly what they're walking into. "I think she's been ready for a while," he said. "She just needed to know she wasn't walking into it alone." Biscuit nodded, drank his coffee. "What's the move?" Jackson looked at the table. "We wait until she's ready. We don't rush her. We make sure the 4 people are solid. And then we help her get to Helena and we make sure she's safe while she does it. And Caldwell doesn't know yet that everything just changed." He pushed back from the table and stood up. "Let's keep it that way as long as possible." I went to bed that night with the window open, the cold Montana air coming through, and thought about the expression on Victoria's face when she looked at the documents and said, "This is enough to take somewhere." 2 years of fear meeting the first real possibility of its end. I thought about what she would need in the days ahead and what the club could provide and what the limits of what anyone could provide were. He thought about the specific loneliness of being 28 and carrying something alone, and what it meant to finally put it down somewhere that could bear the weight. I thought about the man who had sent flowers to her apartment after she quit, who had called her to say warm, pleasant things that meant nothing, and threatened everything, who had walked into May's diner on a Sunday morning and hit her in front of 30 witnesses because he had grown so accustomed to consequence-free action that he had stopped seeing the risk in plain sight. The documents under her bed, the people who would testify, the investigator's office in Helena. Ethan Caldwell had been building something for years. He had built it on other people's fear and other people's silence, and the careful isolation of anyone who might have posed a threat. But silence had an end, fear had an end, and in a fireproof box under a waitress's bed, the ending had been waiting for 2 years. It was almost time. Victoria spent 3 days preparing. She didn't tell May. She didn't tell her neighbor, the retired school teacher, who sometimes watched her car when she was on a long shift. She didn't tell the one friend she had in Silver Creek, a woman named Donna, who worked at the pharmacy and who Victoria had kept at arm's length for 2 years, precisely because keeping people at arm's length was the only way to keep them safe. She moved through those 3 days the way she had learned to move through difficult things methodically, without drama, one step followed by the next. She went to the credit union in Mill Haven on Monday and opened the safety deposit box and sat in the small private room they gave her and went through every document she had stored there. She numbered them. She made a written index. She put everything back in order and added a second copy of the index folded and placed at the top. She called the person holding the third set of copies. His name was David Park, a former coworker from the accounting firm, the only person from that period of her life she had kept in contact with and the only one she had trusted enough. He lived in Billings now. She hadn't spoken to him in 7 months. "Vicky," he said when he picked up. The warmth in his voice was immediate, and she felt the particular ache of realizing how much she had isolated herself by how good it felt just to hear someone say her name that way. I need you to keep holding it, she told him, and I need you to be ready to hand it over to federal investigators if I tell you to, possibly within the next 2 weeks. A pause. Are you moving on this? I'm moving on it. Okay. No hesitation. Tell me what you need. She told him. He listened. He said he'd have everything organized and ready within 48 hours. He asked once if she was safe, and she said yes, which was mostly true. He told her to call him the moment anything changed. After she hung up, she sat in her apartment for a long time without moving. She wasn't afraid exactly. She had been afraid for so long that the feeling had changed. Texture had become something more like a permanent atmospheric pressure, something she moved through rather than felt. What she felt now was different, more acute, the specific sharpness of someone standing at an edge they had been approaching for 2 years, finally looking straight down. She had made a decision. The decision had been made really in the diner on Sunday morning when she looked at the mark Ethan Caldwell's hand had left on her and understood that neutrality had an expiration date. But it was one thing to decide, it was another thing to have it become real. On Wednesday evening, she called Jackson. I'm ready, she said. He said, Friday morning, I'll arrange the drive to Helena. She almost said she could drive herself. Then she stopped and acknowledged that having someone with her was not weakness, that accepting help from someone who was offering it without conditions was a thing she was allowed to do. Okay, she said, Friday. She worked the Thursday shift at May's. She brought coffee. She took orders. She cleared plates. May watched her with the careful, non-intrusive concern of a woman who had run a diner for 30 years and had developed a precise sense for when people were carrying more than their order pad. But she didn't ask. She made Victoria eat before the shift ended, a full plate, none of this picking at a side salad business, sit down and eat, which Victoria did. And it was the most deliberate act of care she had received from another person in months. That night at 11:45, her phone rang. Unknown number. She stood in her apartment looking at the phone screen, and something in her chest went cold before she picked up. Victoria. The voice was warm and familiar, and exactly as she remembered it. I hope I'm not calling too late. I know you have early shifts. Ethan Caldwell's voice had a particular quality, smooth in the way that things are smooth when enormous effort has been spent on the smoothness. A radio announcer's warmth with a boardroom's precision underneath it. What do you want? She said. Not a question. Flat. I've been thinking about you since Sunday, he said. I behaved very badly. I want you to know I'm aware of that. I don't have an excuse. I was having a terrible week, and I took it out in a way that was completely unacceptable. She said nothing. I want to make it right, he continued. I'd like to sit down with you, have a real conversation. I know we didn't end things in the best way when you left the company, and I've always regretted that. We ended things fine, she said. I left. You sent flowers. We were done. Victoria. It's 11:45 at night, and you're calling me from an unknown number. She kept her voice level. Call me from your actual number or don't call me at all. A pause, the first pause he'd taken. I wanted to reach out informally. I didn't want you to feel any kind of pressure. You called me at midnight on a work night from a blocked number to apologize informally. She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. You're not calling to apologize. Another pause. Longer. When he spoke again, the warmth had recalibrated into something that was still smooth but carried a different temperature underneath it. I've heard you've been spending time with some people who might not have your best interests in mind, he said. I'd hate to see you get pulled into something you can't get out of cleanly. You're a smart woman. Smart people know when to step back. There it was, the real call. I want you to hear something, she said. Her voice was steady in a way that surprised even her. I'm going to sleep, and tomorrow I'm going to work my shift. And after that, I'm going to continue making my own decisions without your input. Have a good night. She hung up. She stood in the middle of her apartment, and she breathed, and she waited for her hands to shake, the way they had shaken in the diner. They didn't. She noticed that. Held on to it. She texted Jackson 3 words, he called me. His response came in 40 seconds. Are you okay? She typed yes. It changes nothing. Still Friday. His response, good. Lock your door and get some sleep. I'll be there at 7. She locked her door. She didn't sleep much, but she was there at 7 when Jackson knocked. The drive to Helena was 3.5 hours. Jackson drove. Hector rode separately behind them, a fact Victoria noticed and didn't comment on until they were 20 minutes out of Silver Creek. He's following us, she said. Hector goes where I go when I'm doing something that matters, Jackson said. He's not following us. He's making sure no one else is. She turned and looked out the back window. Hector's bike was a quarter-mile back, steady as a shadow. She turned back. Caldwell called me last night. I know, you texted. He tried to apologize first, then he said he'd heard I was spending time with people who didn't have my best interests. He's got someone watching. That's what I thought. We move fast enough, Jackson said. He knows something's in motion, but he doesn't know what exactly, and he doesn't know how far along it is. The call was a probe. He was trying to get a read on where you are. And what did he get? Nothing useful, Jackson said. You didn't give him anything. She was quiet for a moment. He sounded different at the end. After I pushed back, less warm. That's what he actually sounds like, Jackson said. The warmth is the performance. You just got a glimpse of the thing under it. She thought about that for the rest of the drive. The FBI's Helena field office was on the 7th floor of a federal building that smelled like recycled air and institutional carpet. The agent they met with was named Sandra Reeves. She was 44, sharp-featured, with the no-effect professionalism of someone who had been sitting across tables from people with difficult stories for long enough that she had learned to receive those stories without performing reaction. This Victoria understood it within 2 minutes was exactly what she needed. She did not need sympathy. She needed competence. Jackson stayed in the waiting area. He had offered to come in and Victoria had said no without hesitating. This was her part. This had always been her part. She sat across from Agent Reeves and she laid out the documents. The index she had made, the photographs, the correspondence, the shell company registrations cross-referenced with the dates of the property acquisitions, the payment to the county official, the initials that she believed referenced a county judge. Agent Reeves asked precise, methodical questions. She did not offer encouragement. She did not validate or react emotionally to anything she was hearing. She simply asked the next question and the next question and the next, and Victoria answered each one with the same precision, and for 2 hours they worked through it like two people building something carefully from the same set of materials. At the end, Reeves set down her pen. Miss Dawson, she said, I want to be clear about what I can and cannot tell you at this stage. I can't tell you whether an investigation will be opened, how quickly it might proceed, or what outcome it might produce. I can tell you that what you've brought in today will be reviewed by our Financial Crimes Division and cross-referenced with existing databases. And the county official, Victoria asked, if the documentation supports what you're describing, that would be within our jurisdiction, yes. The judge, Reeves looked at her steadily, the initials referencing a judicial figure will be part of that review. Victoria nodded. She stood up. She picked up the copies of the documents that Reeves had let her retain. She said there are 4 other people, business owners who were targeted by the same pattern. They're willing to give accounts. Reeves made a note. I want their contact information. Victoria put a folded piece of paper on the table. She had prepared it the night before. Names, phone numbers, what each person's experience had been in 2 lines. She walked out. Jackson looked up when she came through the door. He read her face the way someone reads weather quickly, accurately, with the experience of someone who had learned that what you needed to know was in the details. How'd it go? He asked. She's thorough, Victoria said. She didn't give me anything, but she took everything. That's how it works when it's real. I know. She sat down next to him. I know it is. They drove back in a different kind of silence than the drive up. The weight wasn't gone. This was not the part of the story where the weight lifted, but it had shifted. It had moved from the place where it had been sitting inside her and into the world where it was now other people's problem to carry as well as hers. She felt lighter in a way that had nothing to do with the outcome and everything to do with the fact that she was no longer the only person holding it. 3 days later, Ethan Caldwell called again, this time from his actual number. She picked up. I know you went to Helena, he said. The warmth was gone entirely now. What was underneath it was quieter than she'd expected, controlled, precise. I want you to understand what you've started. I understand it better than you do, she said. Victoria, listen to me. A pause. Whatever they told you about how this works, it won't. You have documents you took without authorization from a private company. Chain of custody is a problem. Authentication is a problem. You're a waitress in a diner. My legal team will spend 4 hours establishing that, and the jury will spend 4 minutes deciding. He had thought about this. He had thought about it carefully. She could hear the preparation in it, the way a man who is used to winning sounds when he's explaining why he's going to win. You're calling me to tell me I'm going to lose, she said. I'm calling you because I believe in giving people a chance to make a better decision before it's too late. A chance, she repeated. What does that look like practically? The documents are gone. Everything goes back to where it was. You continue your life without this. Whatever that Jackson Reed told you about what he could offer, he can't offer you protection from what a federal investigation means for the people around you. The people who spoke to him, the people who gave accounts. All of them become part of something very expensive and very damaging and very public. Another pause. I'm asking you to think about what you're doing to them. And there it was, the final shape of it. He had run out of approaches and had arrived at the last one using her conscience against her, suggesting that doing the right thing was actually a form of harm. She thought about Ray Gutierrez wiping his hands on a shop rag in a dealership service bay. She thought about Sandra Kim, who had spent 22 years building a business and lost it in 4 months. She thought about Paul Weaver in the 40 acres of family land. She thought about Earl Hutchins. She thought about what Jackson had said. He didn't win because he was stronger. He won because he convinced everyone they were alone. You're telling me, she said, that I'm hurting them by giving them a chance to be heard. I'm telling you that legal processes are brutal and expensive, and you're dragging people who have already been through enough into something that you dragged them, she said. You made them go through enough. I'm not dragging them anywhere. I'm standing next to them. Her voice was completely steady. She was surprised by that, and also somewhere deeper, she wasn't surprised at all. Don't call me again. She hung up. She sat for a moment. Then she called Ray Gutierrez. He picked up on the second ring. Yeah. He called me, she said. He knows we talked to investigators. He's going to come after everyone's credibility. I wanted you to know before you heard it from someone else. Ray was quiet for a second. What did he say? That the documents have chain of custody problems, that I'm a waitress, that he's going to make it expensive for everyone. Another pause. Is he right about the chain of custody? His lawyers will argue it. The FBI will have their own forensic people. Whether it holds, she stopped. I don't know, I'm being honest with you. Okay, Ray said. Here's what I know. I've got records going back 18 years on that garage. Tax filings, permit history. The violation notices, the remediation quotes, everything. The only thing that was ever wrong with that garage is the same thing that was wrong with me after I sold it, which is that someone who was too powerful squeezed until I gave in. His voice was rough in the way that people's voices get when they're putting language on something they've been carrying in silence. He wants me to think I can't win against him. I've been losing to that man for 2 years already. I'm not scared of losing. I'm scared of doing nothing. Victoria closed her eyes for a moment. Thank you, Ray. Don't thank me. Just let me know when I need to be somewhere. She called Sandra Kim next. Same conversation, different details. Sandra Kim said, he sent a man to my sister's restaurant 6 months after I sold. Sat there for 2 hours, ordered coffee, didn't say anything to anyone. Just sat there. I've been waiting for someone to tell me it wasn't just in my head. Her voice cracked once on the last sentence and then steadied. I'll be wherever you need me. Paul Weaver said, I've got land records going back to my grandfather. He's not the first person who thought they could take something from this family. He's just the first one who almost got away with it. Earl Hutchins said very little. He was 71 and he had lived in Silver Creek his whole life, and he was the kind of man who had spent 71 years not being particularly interested in drama. He said, I will be there, and that was all, and somehow that was more solid than all the other words. On Thursday of that week, Jackson's phone rang at 6 in the morning. It was Danny. Prez, Danny said, I've got something. Talk. I've been running background on the county official in the documents. The one with the payment. His name is Gerald Marsh, county building inspector, been in the role for 9 years. A pause. He resigned this morning, effective immediately. No statement, no reason given. The county administrator's office confirmed it 30 minutes ago. Jackson sat up. That's fast. That's what I thought. Either he found out about the Helena meeting and he's running, or someone told him to get out. Danny paused again. Either way, someone in Caldwell's circle knows this is more serious than he's letting on to Victoria. Jackson was quiet for a moment. Can you find out if Marsh has retained counsel? I'm already on it. He hung up and sat in the early morning quiet and thought about what it meant when a man who had been comfortably positioned for 9 years resigned without statement in the same week that federal investigators received documentation of a payment bearing his name. It meant the circle was breaking. It meant people who had held quiet for years were calculating their personal exposure and making choices about which side of this they wanted to be on when the weight came down. He called Victoria. Marsh resigned, he said when she picked up. She was silent for 3 seconds. He knows. Or Caldwell told him to run. Either way, it means the document is being taken seriously. Or it means Caldwell is cleaning house before it goes further. Both things can be true, Jackson said, and both of them mean the same thing. This has moved past the point where he can manage it quietly. Another silence. Then Jackson, what happens to the judge? If those initials are who I think they are, he's been on the bench for 16 years. That's not our job to figure out. That's the FBI's job. And if they can't prove it, if the initials aren't enough, then that piece doesn't land, he said. But the rest does. The shell companies, the coercion, the Marsh payment, that's a structure. Judges can be removed by investigation and bar processes, even without criminal conviction, if the pattern of outcomes suggests impropriety. Your job is not to solve every piece. Your job is to make the truth available. You've done that. She breathed. He could hear her thinking through it. He's going to try something else, she said. Before this moves further, he's not the kind of man who waits to see what happens. I know. He's going to try to discredit me, or the others. He's going to find something. Let him look, Jackson said. Honest people don't scare easy when someone's digging into their lives. And you haven't done anything wrong. A pause. I took documents from his office. You photographed a misfiled folder that revealed criminal activity. Any prosecutor worth their salary will frame that as a whistleblower action. And if Caldwell's lawyers frame it differently, then Agent Reeves's forensic accountants will have already matched the shell company registration numbers to the property sale dates and won't need the documents to lead the case. Silence. Then quietly, you've thought about this a lot. Since Sunday morning, he said. She was quiet for a moment. I need to tell you something. About why I didn't go to the police 2 years ago, when I first found the documents. You don't have to. I want to. Another pause. The reason I didn't go to the police is that Gerald Marsh and Ethan Caldwell were at a charity dinner together 3 weeks before I found the folder. A photo in the county paper. Caldwell had his arm around Marsh, and there were 2 other men in the photo. One of them was the county sheriff. The weight of that settled in the room between them through the phone line. I didn't know who was clean, she said. I didn't know who was part of it and who wasn't. Going to local law enforcement felt like walking into a room where I didn't know which doors were real. She stopped. That's why it had to be federal. That's why I needed someone outside the structure. And you found it, Jackson said. You found it, she said. We found it, he said. Stop doing the thing where you take yourself out of the sentence. She let out a breath. Something that was almost a laugh. Not quite, but close. Okay, she said. We found it. That evening, Hector came to the chapter house with news that was not good news. He sat down across from Jackson at the table and put his phone face up between them. On screen was a photograph. It had been taken without the subject's knowledge at a distance with a long lens. It showed Victoria Dawson getting into Jackson's truck outside her apartment building. The timestamp on the photo was Wednesday morning, the morning they had driven to Helena. Where'd you get this? Jackson said. It was sent to 3 of our members, Hector said. Text message unknown number. No message, just the photo. Jackson looked at it for a long moment. He's telling us he was watching. That's what it looks like. And he's telling us he knows who she went to Helena with. Yeah, he sent it to club members. Jackson was quiet. Not to her, not to me, to members. Why? Hector was quiet for a moment. Then, because he wants the club to feel like a liability. He wants us to feel like we're exposed. He wants someone to come to you and say, Prez, this is getting too hot, we need to back off. Jackson looked at the photo. He thought about the calculation behind it. It was a sophisticated move, actually, not a threat to Victoria directly, not a direct confrontation with Jackson, which had already not worked once, but a soft pressure on the structure around them. Find the seam, apply pressure to the seam. He picked up the phone and sent the photo to Danny. Trace the number. Already tried, Hector said, burner. Then trace the photo metadata. Danny's on it. Jackson set the phone down. Call a meeting, tonight, full chapter. Hector raised an eyebrow slightly. Not in question, he understood why, but in the way of someone registering the weight of the moment. The meeting was at 9. All 11 members of the Silver Creek chapter were present. Jackson stood at the head of the table and told them everything. Not a summary, everything. The diner, Victoria, the documents, Helena, the 4 business owners, Marcia's resignation, and the photograph. He finished and let the room be quiet for a moment. Then Cole, the youngest member, said, "So, what are we doing?" "Same thing we were doing," Jackson said. "We're making sure she's not alone in this. Even with him watching. Especially with him watching." Jackson looked around the table. "I want to be clear about something. I'm not asking anyone to do anything illegal. I'm not asking anyone to confront Caldwell or his people. What I'm asking is simpler. I want this woman to be able to go to her job and her apartment and her car without looking over her shoulder every second. I want the 4 people who agreed to give accounts to investigators to know that there are people paying attention. That's it. That's the whole ask." Nobody spoke against it. Nobody moved to leave. Biscuit, who had been in the club longer than anyone except Jackson, said, "When do we start?" "We already started," Jackson said, and they had. But what none of them knew yet, what even Victoria in her apartment that night, going over the index she'd made of the documents, did not yet know was that Ethan Caldwell was not done. He had one more move, and it wasn't aimed at Victoria, it was aimed at Jackson. A man who had been doing quiet research on the Silver Creek Hells Angels chapter for 2 weeks had found something. Not something current, something old. Something that had happened 14 years ago in a city 3 states away. Something that had been handled through the legal system and resolved and closed. Something that Jackson had never hidden because there was nothing to hide. It had been adjudicated and it was done. And it was part of a life that had taken years to recalibrate, and he had recalibrated it and moved forward. But in Ethan Caldwell's hands, an old thing became a new weapon. And by the time Jackson found out what was coming, it was already in motion. The call came at 7 in the morning on a Friday. Jackson was at the kitchen table at the chapter house with his second cup of coffee when his phone rang. The number was local, but not one he recognized. He picked up. "Mr. Reed." The voice was professionally neutral in the way that lawyers' voices are professionally neutral, warm enough to suggest reasonableness, cool enough to remind you they're billing by the hour. "My name is Philip Garrett. I represent Ethan Caldwell. I'd like to discuss some information that has recently come to my attention regarding your history in Billings, Montana in the period between 2007 and 2009. Jackson set his coffee mug down very carefully. "I'm listening," he said. "In 2008, you were arrested and charged with aggravated assault following an altercation outside a bar in Billings. The charges were later reduced to simple assault. You pleaded no contest, served 45 days in county jail, and completed a court-mandated anger management program. The record is sealed at the state level, but not inaccessible to a motivated researcher." A pause. "My client feels that this information is relevant to the credibility of the people who have recently been speaking to federal investigators on Ms. Dawson's behalf." Jackson was quiet for a moment. Outside the kitchen window, the morning was gray and still. "What does your client want?" he said. "My client wants to resolve this situation quietly. He has no interest in damaging your reputation or complicating your standing within your organization. He simply wants an assurance that you'll step back from Ms. Dawson's situation and allow things to return to their natural equilibrium." "Natural equilibrium," Jackson repeated. "Silver Creek is a small community. These things have a way of working themselves out when people don't." "I'm going to stop you there," Jackson said. His voice was flat and steady. "You call this number again, I'm going to give your client's number and your number to the FBI field office in Helena, along with a record of this conversation, which I am legally permitted to record in the state of Montana without your knowledge." He paused. "Have a good morning." He hung up. He sat with both hands around the mug. He breathed once slow. He was not rattled by the information itself. The Billings thing was what it was, a night and a man in a situation that had gone sideways, in the specific way that nights and men in situations went sideways when you were 34, and still making decisions based on who was in the room rather than who you wanted to be. He had done the time, he had done the program. I had spent the decade and a half since making different decisions consistently and without drama, and that was the record he lived by. What he was rattled by was the precision of it. Caldwell had been digging, specifically and methodically, and he had found something that was technically public, technically accessible, but required real effort to locate and a specific intention to weaponize. He had been building this move while simultaneously calling Victoria, sending the photograph, watching the apartment. He wasn't reacting. He was running multiple tracks at once, which was what genuinely dangerous people did not, one play, but several, so that when one failed, the next was already in motion. Jackson called Biscuit. "He's going after my record," he said when Biscuit picked up. "Billings 2008. A pause. How'd he get it? Someone who knew where to look and had a reason to look. What's he trying to do with it? Pressure me to back off. Also, if I don't back off, use it to discredit the investigation. Suggest that the people corroborating Victoria's account are being organized by a man with a violent history." Biscuit was quiet for a moment. "That's actually not a bad play." "No," Jackson said, "it's not. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to tell Victoria before she hears it from someone else. And then I'm going to call Agent Reeves's office and report the call I just got from Caldwell's lawyer, because attempting to pressure a witness's support network is its own federal issue. You recorded it. Montana's a one-party consent state." A pause, then Biscuit said, "You knew this was coming." "I knew something was coming," Jackson said. "I didn't know what." He hung up and sat with it for another minute. He wasn't going to pretend the Billings thing was nothing. It had been something. He had hit a man who had hit him first, but he had hit him harder and longer than self-defense required, and the court had been correct in its finding, and he had accepted that correctness without argument. A man who insisted his worst moment wasn't actually his worst moment was a man who hadn't finished reckoning with it. He had reckoned with it. That was the difference between then and now. He called Victoria at 7:40. She picked up immediately, which meant she was already awake, which meant she had probably not slept well, which had been true most nights since Sunday. "I need to tell you something," he said, "before you hear it another way." He told her, plainly. The arrest, the charge, the reduction, the plea, the 45 days. He told her what Caldwell's lawyer had said and what he had said back. She was quiet through all of it. When he finished, she said, "How old were you?" 34. "What happened?" "A man put his hands on a woman at a bar. I intervened. He came at me. I hit him more than I needed to." Another silence. "Were you protecting someone?" "Yes, but that doesn't make the excess right. The court found what it found, and it was accurate." She was quiet again. He waited. "Jackson," she said, "do you honestly think that changes anything for me?" "I think it changes how the investigation looks if Caldwell uses it publicly." "That's not what I asked." "No," he said, "it doesn't change anything for you." "Then let's talk about the part that actually matters," she said. "He's running out of moves. This is what people do when they're running out of moves. They go backward, they dig up whatever they can find, they try to shift the narrative from what they did to who's accusing them." Her voice was focused, sharp. "He wouldn't be doing this if he wasn't worried." Jackson felt something settle in him. "That's exactly right." "So what do we do?" "You don't do anything different. I'm going to call Reeves's office this morning and report the lawyer's call. The attempt to pressure a witness's support network is itself evidence of consciousness of guilt. That's what prosecutors call it, when someone starts making moves that only make sense if they know they're guilty." "Okay," she paused. "Jackson, the Billings thing, it's going to come out. He'll make sure it comes out. People in Silver Creek are going to know." "People in Silver Creek who matter already know," he said. "I don't hide it. He's going to use it to tell people you're dangerous, that I'm being manipulated by Victoria." He said her name with the particular quiet of someone who was done tolerating the direction of a sentence. "Let me worry about my reputation. You have enough to carry." A long pause, then very quietly, "You know what I keep thinking about?" "What?" "The first Sunday after I started at Mays, I spilled a full pot of coffee on myself on the counter on a customer's newspaper. I was mortified. I thought May was going to fire me on the spot." She stopped. "You were at the counter. You handed me the bar towel from next to your mug without saying a word, and you went back to your coffee like nothing had happened. like there was nothing to be embarrassed about. He didn't say anything. I've thought about that a lot, she said, in the last 2 years, when I was sitting alone with those documents and not knowing what to do. I thought about the fact that there was a person who just handed me the towel without making it a thing. Another pause. That's why I trusted you. That's why I told you. Jackson looked at the wall of the kitchen in the chapter house for a moment. Get to work, he said. I'll handle the lawyer. She let out a breath. Yeah, okay. He could hear her getting up, the sounds of a morning in motion. Getting to work was the right answer. Getting to work was always the right answer. He called Agent Reeves's office at 8:15. He was put through to a junior agent named Torres, and he gave a complete account of the call from Philip Garrett, including the recording. Torres asked 3 questions. Jackson answered them. Torres said he would make sure Agent Reeves received the information. 20 minutes after that call, Danny called Jackson. Prez, you need to know something, and you need to know it now. Talk. I've been running background on Philip Garrett, the lawyer who called you. He's based in Missoula, criminal defense, some civil litigation. His client list is clean on the surface. A pause. But I cross-referenced his case history with property transaction litigation in this county over the last 7 years. He's appeared as counsel on 4 cases. All of them involve small business owners who were in disputes with the shell companies Caldwell used. All 4 cases settled out of court. All 4 settlements included NDAs. Jackson went still. He's not just Caldwell's lawyer, he's been part of the operation. He's how Caldwell made the settlements disappear quietly, Danny said. The NDAs weren't just protecting Caldwell, they were protecting Garrett. If those settlement terms become part of a federal discovery process, Garrett has exposure too. Which means the call this morning wasn't just from Caldwell, Jackson said slowly. Garrett was also acting in his own self-interest. That's how I read it. Send everything you have on Garrett to my email. I'm forwarding it to Helena. He sent the email to Torres's address with a note additional material regarding Philip Garrett Escorn, whose call I reported this morning. Attorney may have direct involvement in the pattern of conduct under investigation. See attached. He sat back and thought about the shape of it. Caldwell had built something that required multiple people to maintain. The shell companies needed lawyers. The inspector needed to be managed. The settlements needed to be structured. A machine like that didn't run on one man's will. It ran on a network of people who each had their own reasons to keep it running. Marsh, the inspector, had resigned because his exposure was direct and immediate. Garrett had made the call this morning because his exposure was arriving from a direction he hadn't anticipated. The machine was starting to eat itself. At noon, Jackson's phone rang again. Unknown number, different from the one Garrett had used. He answered. Jackson Reed. The voice was Ethan Caldwell's. Not the warm version, not the boardroom version. Something rawer underneath both of those. Something that had been stripped of its layers by the specific pressure of the last week. I want to talk to you directly. You have a lawyer for that. My lawyer made a mistake calling you this morning. That was an error in judgment Your lawyer made a recorded call attempting to intimidate a federal witnesses support network, Jackson said. That call has been reported to the FBI. If you want to make that worse by calling me yourself, you're welcome to keep going. A pause, the pause of a man recalibrating. You don't understand what you're involved in. I think I understand it fine. Reed. The voice changed again, dropped lower, less polished. I have been building things in this town for 12 years. Things that employ people. Things that fund the hospital wing and the school renovation and the community center. The businesses that were sold to my companies are still operating. The people who work in them still have jobs. I'm not some cartoon villain. I'm someone who makes hard decisions in complicated situations, and sometimes people get hurt in the process. But the alternative, Jackson said, was not to steal from them. Silence. You didn't make hard decisions in complicated situations, Jackson said. You identified people who were vulnerable. You manufactured the vulnerability when it didn't exist, and you took what they'd spent their lives building for 60 cents on the dollar through shell companies that didn't disclose your involvement. That's not development. That's predation dressed in a good suit. You're going to destroy this town to make a point. You hollowed out this town to make a profit. I'm just making it visible. Another silence. Longer. When Caldwell spoke again, the rawness was fully exposed now, no professional veneer left. What do you want? There has to be something. Every man has a number. Jackson felt something very cold move through him. Not anger, something quieter and more absolute. I want you to understand something. I'm not doing this for money. I'm not doing this for Victoria Dawson specifically, though she is owed something real. I'm doing it because I have been watching men like you operate in towns like this one my entire life. And every single time the reason they get away with it is because the people around them decide the cost of stopping it is too high. He paused. I'm someone for whom that calculation came out differently. That's all. Caldwell said nothing. Don't call him this number again, Jackson said. He ended the call. He held the phone for a moment. Then he put it face down on the table and finished his coffee, which had gone cold. The afternoon moved fast. Agent Reeves called at 2:15. She had reviewed the recording of Garrett's call and the materials Danny had compiled on his involvement in the NDA settlements. She was not effusive, but her tone had shifted slightly from the studied neutrality of their first meeting to something more direct. She said that the investigation had been elevated to include a broader pattern of conduct review. She said that a second agent from the Financial Crimes Division would be reviewing the shell company documentation. She said that Victoria should be available for a follow-up interview, likely within the week. She said specifically, the materials Miss Dawson provided in combination with the corroborating accounts and the additional information regarding Mr. Garrett have substantially strengthened the evidentiary basis. Jackson called Victoria immediately after. Reeves called. It's moving. He heard the sharp intake of breath on her end. How fast? Fast enough. She wants you for a follow-up interview this week. Okay, a pause. Is it Jackson? Is it actually going to happen? Or is there still a way he gets out of it? He's a wealthy man with good lawyers, Jackson said. There's always a way he tries to get out of it. But the more corroboration stacks up, the harder that gets. Right now, he's lost Marsh. He's exposed Garrett. He's put himself on recordings, making calls that look like obstruction. And there are 4 business owners ready to give accounts that match your documentation. He paused. He's not getting out of this clean. She breathed. Okay. How are you doing? I'm at work, she said. May keeps refilling my coffee even when I haven't touched the cup. She knows something's happening. She's been leaving baked goods in my vicinity all week. 2 days ago, she put a whole pie on the counter and just walked away. That's how May shows love, Jackson said. A pause, then quietly, it's been a long time since I let someone do that. He didn't push it. He let it be what it was. Don't work a double tonight. Go home at a reasonable hour and sleep. You sound like a parent. I sound like someone who needs you functional for a federal interview this week. That's less flattering. Go home at a reasonable hour, Victoria. She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. Fine. That evening, Earl Hutchins called Jackson. He almost never called. He was a man who conserved words the way people of his generation conserved other things, not from stinginess, but from a sense that words meant more when they weren't overused. Something happened today, Earl said. Thought you should know. Man came to my door this afternoon, suit briefcase. Said he was doing research on property owners in the county, academic research, wanted to ask me a few questions. I told him I wasn't interested. He gave me a card and left. You have the card in my hand. Read me the name. Earl, read it. It wasn't Garrett. Different attorney, different firm, Missoula-based. Jackson wrote the name down and texted it to Danny before Earl had finished the sentence. He's sending people to the witnesses, Jackson said. What they'll tell you is that they're just gathering information. What they're actually doing is establishing contact so they can later argue that the witnesses were approached and influenced. Influenced by who? By anyone, by me, by each other, by the process. His lawyers will try to say the accounts were coordinated rather than independent. It's a contamination argument. Earl was quiet for a moment. What do I do if he comes back? Don't speak to him. Don't take any documents he offers. Call me and call Agent Reeves's office, which I'm going to text you the number for in the next 5 minutes. Jackson paused. Earl, I need to ask you something. Did the man say anything specific? Anything that stood out? Earl thought. He said he understood I'd been through a difficult experience with the property. He said sometimes these things could be resolved more simply than people expected, and that his client was open to a conversation about appropriate compensation. Jackson straightened. He offered you money. Not directly, but that's what he meant. That is a federal witness tampering attempt, Jackson said quietly. Earl, I need you to write down exactly what he said, as close to word for word as you can remember with the time and date, right now, while it's fresh. Earl said, hold on. Jackson heard the sound of a drawer opening paper, a pen. Okay, going. He waited while Earl wrote. He texted Agent Reeves's office number and texted Danny the new attorney's name simultaneously. His phone was running 3 conversations at once, and outside the light was dropping, and Silver Creek was going about its evening in the way that Silver Creek always went about its evening. And somewhere across town, Ethan Caldwell was sitting in his office or his house with his lawyers around him and understanding for the first time that the machine he had built was not just cracking at the edges but fracturing at the center. The witness tampering attempt was the move of a desperate man, not a calculating one. A calculating man would have let the investigation proceed and trusted his legal team to fight it on technical grounds. A desperate man sent someone to Earl Hutchins's door with a card and a briefcase and an implication of money, and in doing so handed the prosecution a gift. Jackson called Victoria one more time that night. Late, after 10, she picked up on the first ring. He went to Earl, Jackson said. What? He told her. She was quiet through it, and then she said, he's panicking. Yes. Good. Her voice was flat and certain in a way it hadn't been a week ago. When a man like that panics, he makes mistakes. How bad is the witness? It's the witness tampering thing. It's bad for him. Good for us. Torres is going to want Earl's written account first thing tomorrow. I'll call Earl tonight and make sure he's okay. He's okay. Earl Hutchins has been okay through harder things than this. Still, she said, I'll call him. A pause between them, the comfortable kind. Jackson, she said, what happens after? After the investigation, after the charges, after all of it, what does Silver Creek look like? I thought about it honestly. Different. Not fixed. Different. The businesses don't come back the way they were. The years don't come back. But the people who were hurt get to be heard. And the structure that Caldwell built, the thing that convinced everyone they were alone, that gets dismantled. And once people see that it can be dismantled, they remember that they're allowed to dismantle things that need dismantling. She was quiet for a moment. That's not a happy ending. No, he said. It's a true one. Happy endings are for people who don't understand what endings actually look like. True endings are messier and slower and harder, and they leave marks. A pause, but they're real. She thought about that. I can work with real. I know you can. She said, good night. He said, good night. He put the phone down and sat in the quiet of the chapter house and listened to the specific silence of a place where 11 men had decided that something mattered enough to be inconvenient about. I thought about what Caldwell had said on the phone. Every man has a number. He had meant it as an insight into human nature, a universal that he had confirmed through long experience. He had spent years finding numbers, finding the point at which a person's resistance converted to compliance. The price of the permit fight, the cost of the legal fees, the calculation of years versus money versus what you could stomach losing. He had found Victoria's number 2 years ago, and she had not moved. He had set a price, and she had looked at it and refused to pay it, and then carried the refusal in a fireproof box under her bed for 730 days. He had found Jackson's number this morning, and Jackson had recorded the call and sent it to the FBI. And now he was sending lawyers to Earl Hutchins' door, and Earl Hutchins was a 71-year-old man who had spent his whole life in Silver Creek and had seen things come and go, and the number Caldwell had implied had not found purchase in Earl's expression because Earl Hutchins was not a man who had a number. He was a man who had a threshold, and that threshold was simpler and harder than any dollar amount. It was the threshold of the thing that lets you look at yourself in the mirror without having to perform the looking. Caldwell had never understood that kind of person because he had never been that kind of person. That was ultimately the flaw in the machine. It had been built by someone who believed everyone was purchasable because he himself was purchasable, and it worked perfectly until it encountered people who weren't. And now he had encountered 4 of them, 5 if you counted Jackson, 6 if you counted May, who had been putting pie on counters all week and watching her Sunday morning waitress carry something enormous, with the specific fierce tenderness of a woman who had been running a diner on a state highway for 31 years and understood exactly what it cost to keep showing up. The next morning at 8:47, Agent Sandra Reeves called Jackson directly for the first time. "Mr. Reed," she said, "I want to inform you that as of this morning, a federal grand jury subpoena has been issued for Ethan Caldwell's financial records covering the period of 2016 to present. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that the investigation is now at a stage where the people involved need to be very careful about their safety and their communications." A pause. "I'd also like you to pass along to Miss Dawson that her follow-up interview has been moved to Monday morning. We'll need her in Helena at 9. "I'll make sure she's there," Jackson said. "One more thing." Another pause. Reeves paused before things that mattered. Jackson had noticed that. "The information you provided regarding Mr. Garrett has opened a secondary inquiry into the NDA settlements. We believe there may be additional victims who were silenced through those agreements. If you or Miss Dawson are aware of anyone who settled with the shell companies and signed NDAs, please have them contact our office. The NDA are not enforceable in the context of a federal investigation." Jackson wrote down every word. "Agent Reeves," he said, "how serious is this?" She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "I've been in financial crimes for 11 years. What we have here, the corroboration, the pattern, the attorney involvement, and now the witness tampering attempt on Mr. Hutchins. This is a serious case, Mr. Reed. I'm not going to give you timeline or outcome projections, but I'll tell you that the subpoena was not contested by Caldwell's legal team this morning. They didn't even try." He understood what that meant. When a legal team with resources doesn't contest a subpoena, it's because they've done the math and they know that contesting it produces worse optics than allowing it. They knew what the records contained. They had made the calculation. He called Victoria before he did anything else. She was at May's mid-shift. He could hear the diner in the background, the ordinary morning sounds of a place doing its job. "Federal grand jury subpoena," he said. "His financial records. Monday morning, 9 o'clock, Helena Agent Reeves." The background sounds continued for a moment. Then he heard her step away from them, adore the quieter air of the back hallway near the kitchen. "A grand jury," she said. "Yes." She breathed. He heard the specific quality of it, not relief, not triumph, something more complicated. The breathing of someone who had been holding a weight for so long that even the beginning of putting it down produced not lightness, but a profound, aching awareness of how heavy it had been. "He didn't contest the subpoena," Jackson said, "because he knows what's in the records." "Yes." Silence. "Then 2 years, she said, quietly. Not to him exactly, to herself, to the 2 years, to the fireproof box and the safety deposit box in Millhaven, and the photographs on her phone, and every Sunday morning, she had come to work and poured coffee and smiled at people and carried this underneath all of it. 2 years. "It's not over," he said, carefully, honestly. "There's a long way between a subpoena and a conviction. I know that. He has lawyers and money and—" "Jackson." Her voice had that edge of focus again, the one that had been emerging and sharpening all week. "I know all of that. I have known all of that. That's why I waited 2 years. Because I couldn't see a way that it ended well." A pause. "I can see it now. I can see it, even if it's slow and ugly and his lawyers make it hard." Another pause. "I can see the end of it." He let that stand because it was true. And because sometimes the most important thing that happens in a long fight is not a tactical victory, but the moment when the person who has been fighting the longest lifts their head and looks at the horizon and sees for the first time that there is one. Ethan Caldwell was not done. He was not going to go quietly. He had lawyers and money and 12 years of carefully constructed relationships and every tool that a man of his specific type accumulates over a lifetime of operating inside the gap between what's legal and what's right. But the grand jury had been seated. The subpoena had been served. The records were coming. And Victoria Dawson was going back to Helena on Monday morning with her index and her documentation and the specific hardened resolve of a woman who had made her decision and was not going to unmake it. The machine was not broken yet, but it was making sounds it had never made before, and everybody in Silver Creek who had ever put their ear to the wall and heard something wrong could hear them. Victoria didn't sleep Sunday night, not because she was afraid. She had moved past afraid in the way that people move past a place they have driven through so many times that it stops registering as a destination and becomes simply a part of the road. She lay in her apartment in the dark and listened to Silver Creek doing what small towns did at 2 in the morning, almost nothing. The specific almost nothing of a place where the last bar had closed and the first farm equipment hadn't started yet, and she thought about Monday. She thought about Agent Reeves in the follow-up interview and what new questions would come from a grand jury subpoena and what answers she had that she hadn't already given. She went through the index in her head, every document, every date, every amount. She had memorized it the way she had memorized everything in her life that mattered, not by trying to memorize it, but by living with it long enough that it became part of the furniture of her interior. She got up at 5. She made coffee. She sat at her table and looked at the wall and drank it. At 6:15, her phone buzzed. Jackson, a text, not a call. It said, "Trucks gassed, ready when you are." She texted back 20 minutes. She got dressed. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a moment. Not the prolonged, self-scrutinizing look of someone seeking reassurance, but the brief, practical look of someone checking that they were presentable for something that mattered. She looked okay. She looked like a 28-year-old woman who had not slept enough and had been carrying something heavy for 2 years and was about to walk into a federal building and finish what she started. That was fine. That was exactly right. Jackson was outside at 6:40. Hector was already on his bike 3 buildings down. Neither of them made anything of it. Victoria got in the truck and Jackson pulled out of the lot and they drove toward Helena in the early morning dark. And for the first 30 minutes, neither of them said much, and the silence was the kind that doesn't need filling. Then Victoria said, "I keep thinking about what happens if his lawyers find a way to suppress the documents." "They'll try," Jackson said. "They've been trying since the moment the subpoena was served. But if they succeed, then the corroborating accounts stand independently. Ray's records, Sandra's compliance documentation, Earl's written account of the tampering approach, Paul's land records going back to his grandfather." He kept his eyes on the road. "The documents are the spine. The corroboration is the body. Even without the spine, a body can tell you a lot." She looked out the passenger window. The mountains were starting to materialize out of the dark, the sky going from black to a deep, reluctant gray. "What about Garrett if he flips?" "Danny thinks he will. He's got too much personal exposure to stay loyal to Caldwell all the way down. If Garrett flips, he can speak to the structure directly. He drafted the NDAs. He managed the settlements. He can walk investigators through every step of how the machine that worked from the inside," Jackson said. "That's worth more than any document." She nodded slowly. She had thought through this so many times that the thinking had a groove to it. Now a worn path her mind traveled automatically. But saying it out loud with someone else who understood the terrain made it real in a different way. "There's something I didn't tell Reeves in the first interview," she said. Jackson's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice stayed even. "Okay. Not because I was hiding it, because I wasn't sure it was relevant and I didn't want to introduce something I couldn't support." She paused. "When I photographed the documents, there was a second folder behind the first one. I only had a few minutes before someone might come back, so I got everything in the first folder and I got the cover page of the second one. Just the cover page. What was on it? A property address, a development proposal, and a timeline." She paused. "The timeline was dated 18 months in the future from when I found it, which means it was a planned acquisition, something that hadn't happened yet at the time." "What property?" She said it. "The address." Jackson was quiet for a full 5 seconds. "That's the community center," he said. "Yes. The one the county uses for senior programs, after-school programs, the food bank distribution." "Yes." Her voice was flat and precise. "He was planning to acquire it, which means he was planning to either develop it or hold it as leverage. Either way, the programs end and the building becomes another asset in his portfolio." Jackson gripped the wheel. "You have the photo." "I have the cover page. It shows the address, the project header, and the first 3 lines of the timeline. It doesn't show the full plan or all the parties, but it shows the address and it shows Caldwell's internal project code, which matches the same coding system as the other projects in the first folder." "That's pattern evidence," Jackson said. "It's not standalone, but in context it shows the scope. He wasn't done with Silver Creek. He was still building. He had a whole next phase," Victoria said. "I just couldn't prove it from one cover page." "You don't have to prove it. You have to make it available and let Reeves's team cross-reference it with the financial records they're now pulling. He glanced at her. Tell her today. All of it. I was going to. Good. They drove in silence for a mile. Then Victoria said, the community center. May does the food bank distribution shift there on the third Saturday of every month. I know. Half the people in Silver Creek, over 60, depend on that building for something. I know, Jackson said. That's who he was going after next, the people who couldn't fight back. She turned and looked at him directly. He had a plan for all of it, the whole town. We weren't an accident or a target of opportunity. We were a project. Yes, Jackson said quietly. You were. The weight of that settled between them for the rest of the drive. Agent Reeves met them in the lobby. She shook Jackson's hand the first time she had done that and led Victoria upstairs while Jackson stayed in the waiting area with coffee that tasted like it had been made before the weekend. The interview ran 2 hours and 40 minutes. Victoria told Reeves everything. The community center cover page, the photo on her phone, the project code, the timeline. Reeves asked precise questions, and Victoria answered with the same methodical clarity she had been building toward for 2 years. At one point, a second agent came in, the financial crimes analyst, a woman named Patricia Huang, who was 30-something, and moved through the documents with the speed of someone who had been doing this long enough to read financial structures the way other people read plain text. Huang looked at the cover page photo for 30 seconds and said without looking up, the project code here is a match for 2 acquisitions in the subpoenaed records. We've been trying to identify what the third code belonged to. This is it. She looked at Reeves. The community center parcel was in a pre-acquisition staging account. He'd already moved money toward it. Reeves looked at Victoria. When did you photograph this? 26 months ago. And the staging account transaction we've identified in the subpoenaed records is dated 22 months ago. Reeves set down her pen. He started moving money 4 months after you left. Victoria understood immediately. He didn't know I had the cover page. He thought the risk was contained to the first folder. So he kept going. He kept going, Reeves confirmed. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Huang said, this connects the financial records to the planning documents. It's not circumstantial anymore. It's a direct evidentiary chain from the internal planning to the financial movement to the shell company's structure. She looked at Reeves. We can build the full sequence now. Reeves looked at Victoria for a long moment. Miss Dawson, I want to tell you something that I don't typically say at this stage of an investigation because it can create expectations that the process doesn't always meet. She paused. What you've brought to this office over the course of 2 interviews, combined with the corroborating accounts in the financial records, constitutes one of the most complete evidentiary packages I've received in 11 years. You did not just report something. You preserved it, organized it, and delivered it in a form that a prosecution team can work with directly. Another pause. That is not common, and it matters. Victoria looked at the table. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, I just didn't want to lose it. You didn't, Reeves said. When Victoria came through the lobby doors, Jackson stood up. He read her face. She said the community center cover page matched a staging account in the subpoenaed records. They have a direct evidentiary chain. I was very still for a moment. Then he sat back down slowly and rubbed one hand across his beard, and she understood that was him processing something that was too large for a quick response. How's Reeves? He said. She told me it was one of the most complete evidentiary packages she'd received in 11 years. He looked at her for a moment. You okay? She thought about it honestly. I'm shaky, she said. Not bad shaky, the kind of shaky you get when something you've been bracing against for a long time starts to actually move. Yeah, he said, I know that kind. They drove back to Silver Creek in midday light, the mountains clear and specific. Now the sky that particular Montana blue that felt almost aggressive in its clarity. Hector was behind them, the same as always, steady as a shadow, and Victoria watched the road come toward them and thought about Ethan Caldwell, somewhere in the same landscape in his office or his house, with his lawyers around him, and the financial records being reviewed, and Philip Garrett calculating his own survival. She thought about the staging account. 22 months ago, he had started moving money toward the community center, 4 months after she'd left. He had looked at her departure and decided the risk was manageable and gone back to building. He had been that confident, that certain that the machine would hold and the silence would hold and the one woman who had seen the folder would stay folded. He had been wrong. That afternoon, Danny called Jackson. Garrett flipped, he said. Jackson pulled over, literally stopped the truck on the side of the road. Say that again. Philip Garrett entered into a proffer agreement with federal prosecutors this morning. He's cooperating, full cooperation, in exchange for reduced charges on his own exposure in the NDA settlements. Jackson looked at Victoria. She had heard enough of the call from the passenger seat. Her hand went to the door handle and then stopped, and she just sat there with her hand on the door handle and her eyes straight ahead. Garrett was with him from the beginning, Danny continued. He's got documentation on the judge. Not initials, names, actual communication. Email chains between Caldwell and the judge's clerk going back 8 years with payment records. The judge, Jackson said. The judge, Danny confirmed. Sitting county judge who has been on the bench for 16 years. The same judge who dismissed 4 of the cases brought against Caldwell's shell companies. The same judge who is currently still hearing cases in this county. The weight of it was staggering. Not just Caldwell, not just the inspector now gone. The judge, the person who was supposed to be the last line between power and accountability, had been on the payroll. Garrett had it all, Jackson said. Garrett built the payment structure. He moved the money. He was the mechanism. A pause. He also knows about 2 other properties that were in pre-acquisition staging. Neither of them Silver Creek. County's over. Small towns. It wasn't just us, Jackson said. Silver Creek was his model, Danny said. He was scaling it. Jackson ended the call. He sat with both hands on the wheel and looked at the road. Victoria said, "Tell me," he told her. "All of it? Garrett the judge, the payment records, the other counties." She was quiet through all of it. When he finished, she said, he was building a machine to take apart small towns, one by one, the same pattern, the same tools, the same structure. And Silver Creek was where he worked the kinks out. She looked out the window. All those people in those other counties, they don't know yet. They'll know, Jackson said. When this comes out, investigators will look at the pattern everywhere. That's what RICO does. It follows the structure, not just the specific crime. She turned to look at him. How long? Before charges could be weeks, could be 2 months. Reeves won't rush it, and she won't let it slow down either. He paused. The judge is the piece that changes everything. You can't have a sitting judge in the indictment and not move. The pressure from above will be significant. She nodded once, slow. And the people in Silver Creek, when do they find out? Soon, he said. These things don't stay quiet once a judge is involved. Someone talks. A court employee, a journalist, someone in Garrett's circle. He paused. You should be ready for it to become public very quickly once it breaks. She looked at her hands in her lap. May's going to find out. Yes. She's going to want to talk about it. Probably for about 6 hours straight, Jackson said. Something moved through Victoria's face that was, despite everything, close to a smile. She's going to make an entire pie specifically about this. At minimum. They drove the rest of the way in the particular quiet of people who have said what needed to be said and are now letting it be real. 3 weeks later, Ethan Caldwell was indicted. 18 federal counts. Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery of a public official, 2 officials. Marsh and the judge, obstruction of justice for the calls to Victoria and Jackson, and the approach to Earl Hutchins and RICO conspiracy for the pattern of conduct across 4 counties in the state of Montana. Philip Garrett was named as a co-conspirator with a cooperation agreement. Gerald Marsh was named as an unindicted co-conspirator. The county judge, whose name was in the headlines within 36 hours of the indictment being filed, was suspended pending his own separate judicial conduct proceedings, which moved with the particular swiftness that judicial bodies apply when a sitting judge has become a federal liability. The morning the indictment was announced, Jackson was at May's counter at 6:15. He was there early because he knew what the day was going to be, and he wanted a cup of coffee before it became what it was going to become. Victoria came out of the kitchen at 6:30. She saw him. She poured 2 mugs without being asked. She set one in front of him and kept one for herself and stood across the counter. 18 counts, she said. 18. She picked up her mug. Her hands were completely steady. Ray called me last night. He cried, not a lot, but he cried. Jackson nodded. Sandra Kim called this morning, before my shift. She said she's been sitting with the dry cleaning equipment she bought secondhand after she sold the business. The equipment she was using to try to start again, smaller. And she said she finally feels like she can breathe. Victoria looked at the counter surface. She said she finally feels like it wasn't her fault. It wasn't. I know, but knowing and feeling are different things. She needed someone official to say it. The indictment says it. Yes, Victoria said, it does. She drank her coffee. The diner was starting to fill. The Sunday morning crowd arriving in their usual rhythms, families and farmers, and old men with newspapers, the regular churn of a small town doing its Sunday. But something was different in the room today, a charge in the air, the particular energy of a community that has learned something enormous about itself and hasn't quite figured out how to sit with it yet. May came out from the kitchen and saw Jackson and put both hands on the counter and looked at him with the expression of a woman who had been running this diner for 31 years and had developed strong opinions about most things. You want to tell me, she said, what exactly I missed while I was back there making biscuits for the last 3 weeks? Jackson looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at May. And then for the first time in all of it, Victoria Dawson started talking without calculating what was safe to say. She talked for 20 minutes. May listened without interrupting, which was remarkable. When Victoria finished, May stood up straight and crossed her arms and looked at the ceiling for a moment and then looked at Victoria. The community center, May said. He had money staged for it 22 months ago. The food bank, May said, would have been gone. May was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I'm going to need you to start from the beginning and tell me every single part of it slowly because I missed a lot and I need to understand what this girl did. She said it to Jackson. Jackson told her, slowly, the way she'd asked. May listened. Her expression went through several things during the telling, anger which she wore loudly. Something harder and more specific, which was the reaction of a woman who understood exactly what the community center meant to the people who needed it. And then at the end, something that was not quite pride, but was in the same neighborhood. Looking at Victoria with the directness of someone who had watched someone grow into themselves in real time and was not going to be quiet about what she had seen. Victoria, May said, yeah, you did something. She said it flat and certain the way May said things she meant. I don't care how it turns out in the courts. I don't care how long it takes. You sat on something for 2 years when most people would have run from it or buried it, and then you stood up in a federal office and put it on the table. She paused. That took guts that most people don't have. Victoria opened her mouth to say something deflecting. Then she stopped. She had been deflecting for 2 years. She had been making herself smaller and quieter and less than she was for 2 years, and she was finished with it. Thank you, she said. I know. May looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded one sharp nod, satisfied with the answer. In the months that followed, Silver Creek moved through things the way that communities move through things, not smoothly, not quickly, but persistently. The trial date was set for 8 months out. Caldwell's legal team filed motion after motion, the standard procedural warfare of wealthy defendants with talented lawyers. Judge Morrow, the sitting county judge, resigned before the Judicial Conduct Board completed its process, which most observers read as a negotiated exit. His cases were reviewed. 2 of the 4 dismissed suits against Caldwell's shell companies were reinstated. Ray Gutierrez reopened his garage. Not the old one. That building was still owned by one of the shell companies, which was now frozen as a result of the RICO proceedings. But a smaller space, 2 bays on the east side of town with a loan from the county Small Business Development Fund that he had not qualified for 2 years ago because his credit rating had taken damage from the remediation costs. He called it Gutierrez Auto. He put a hand-painted sign above the door that his son had made, and on the first day he opened, 11 people brought their cars in, which was more than he could handle, and he called it the best problem he'd had in years. Sandra Kim did not reopen the dry cleaning business. She had looked at what it would take and calculated the cost and made the decision that some things that end don't need to be restarted to be meaningful. What she did instead was take a job as the operations coordinator for the county's Small Business Development Office. Because she had 22 years of experience running a small business And the office had an opening, and she understood from the inside what small business owners needed when things went wrong. She sent Victoria a card on the day she started. It said 3 words because of you. Victoria put it on the refrigerator and left it there. Paul Weaver got the 40 acres back, not through the criminal proceeding that took a separate civil action that he filed with the help of an attorney in Missoula, who took the case on contingency because she had read about the indictment and understood the landscape. The shell company that held the land was in receivership as part of the RICO asset freeze, and the civil action moved through a different judge's court with a clean record, and 14 months after the indictment was filed, the court ordered the transfer of the parcel back to the Weaver family. Paul called Jackson when he got the news. He said 2 things. He said, my grandfather's land. And then he said, tell her. Jackson told her. Victoria was at work when he called. She stepped into the back hallway near the kitchen, the same hallway she had stepped into when she took Jackson's call about the grand jury subpoena, and she stood there with the phone and listened to what Paul Weaver had said and did not cry, which took real effort. She said, I'll call him tonight. He'll want that, Jackson said. Earl Hutchins stayed in Silver Creek and said very little about any of it, which was consistent with who Earl Hutchins had always been. When asked by a local reporter if he wanted to make a statement about his role in the investigation, he said, I told the truth about what happened to me. That's not a role that's just what you're supposed to do on. The reporter published it, and it was the most shared quote from the entire story in the local coverage. Caldwell's trial began on a Tuesday in October, 14 months after the indictment. Victoria was on the witness list. She had known she would be. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything that mattered, methodically, without drama, one step at a time. She worked with the assistant U.S. attorney on her direct examination. She worked with the victim advocacy coordinator on what cross-examination from Caldwell's defense would look like. She read everything they gave her, and she asked specific questions, and she did not ask for reassurance because she had stopped needing it handed to her from outside. The night before she testified, Jackson called. How are you? He said. Ready? She said. You're going to be fine. I know. A pause. Jackson, can I ask you something I've been thinking about for a while? Yeah. The morning in the diner when he hit me, you were in the corner booth. You'd been there for maybe 40 minutes before it happened. She paused. You watched the whole thing leading up to it. The toast argument, the second plate, all of it. Yes. At what point did you decide you were going to stand up? He was quiet for a moment. When he grabbed your wrist, he said. Not when he hit you, before. When he put his hand on you without asking, and you told him to let go, and he didn't immediately. Another pause. A man who won't let go of a wrist when a woman asks isn't a man who's going to let go of anything. I knew what was coming. She sat with that. You stood up before it happened. I stood up when I saw what kind of man he was. She was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about that, about how you were already in motion, and I didn't see it. I was so focused on getting through the moment without escalating that I didn't look at the room. She paused. I've been thinking about what it means that there were 30 people in that diner, and you were the one who stood up. Most people are waiting for someone else to go first, Jackson said. They're not cowards, they're just waiting. The first person to move is the one who decides they're not going to wait anymore. Is that what you decided? I decided a long time ago. I just get up when it's time. She thought about that. I want to be that kind of person. Victoria, he said, you've been that kind of person. You've been that person since the night you photographed those documents in a filing room, when you could have refiled the folder and never looked at it again. You just didn't know it yet. She thought about the 26-year-old version of herself standing in a filing room, holding a phone, photographing pages that she knew were going to cost her something significant. She thought about the specific moment when she had made the choice, not the dramatic version, not with thunder and clarity, but the quiet, shaking, terrified version where she just kept photographing because something in her could not make herself stop. She had been that kind of person then. She had just spent 2 years being afraid that it hadn't been enough. Get some sleep, Jackson said. Tomorrow you're going to walk into that courtroom and say what happened. That's all. Just say what happened. That's all, she said. That's everything, he said. She testified on a Wednesday morning. She was on the stand for 4 hours, 2 of direct examination and 2 of cross-examination. Caldwell's defense attorney was skilled and relentless and tried 6 different approaches to suggest that her account was motivated by personal grievance, that the documents were unreliable, that her memory of events was shaped by the 2 years she had spent building a narrative around them. Victoria answered every question directly. She did not hedge. She did not perform emotion. She did not look at Caldwell at the defense table, not once, not because she was afraid to, but because he was not relevant to the truth she was saying, and looking at him would have made it about him, and it was not about him. It was about what happened. It was about Ray's garage and Sandra's dry cleaning business, and Paul's 40 acres and Earl's apartment building, and the community center that had almost been next. It was about the specific, documented, corroborated pattern of a man who had decided that Silver Creek was his property and its people were his resources. She said all of it, plainly, completely, without drama and without softening. When she stepped down from the stand, she walked out of the courtroom and into the hallway and sat in a chair against the wall and breathed for approximately 90 seconds. Then she stood up and went to the water fountain and drank and straightened her jacket and walked outside into the October air. Jackson was on the steps. He had not been allowed in the courtroom during her testimony, but he had been there all morning, which she had known without needing to check. She stood next to him and looked at the street. "Done," she said. "Done," he said. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 2 days and 4 hours. They convicted on 16 of the 18 counts. The 2 counts they acquitted on were the most technical RICO charges, which the defense had successfully argued required a broader pattern of leadership than could be attributed specifically to Caldwell's direct conduct. The 16 convictions included all 4 bribery counts, the wire and mail fraud, the obstruction charges, and the core conspiracy count. Philip Garrett, under his cooperation agreement, received 2 years supervised probation and permanent disbarment from the Montana bar. He never practiced law again. Gerald Marsh pleaded to a misdemeanor administrative violation in a separate proceeding. He paid a fine. He moved to Arizona within 6 months. The county judge avoided criminal charges because Garrett's cooperation evidence, while sufficient to establish the payment structure, had been filtered through attorney-client channels in a way that gave federal prosecutors less than they needed for a clean criminal case. The Judicial Conduct Board removed him from the bench permanently. He resigned before the formal order was issued. Caldwell was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. His attorneys filed appeals immediately. The appeals process would take years. He would remain in custody during it. The morning after the sentencing, Victoria drove to Mays. Not for her shift. She had taken the day off, the first day off she had taken in months that wasn't medical or emergency related. She drove there because it was Sunday and because some habits are worth keeping even when they're not required. Jackson was at the counter. His usual corner booth was empty. He had moved to the counter, which was not his usual spot, but seemed right this morning. She came around the back and put on the apron anyway. May looked at her and started to say something about her day off, and Victoria said, "I want to." And May closed her mouth and nodded. Victoria poured 2 mugs. She set one in front of Jackson. She kept one for herself. She stood across the counter. For a while, neither of them said anything. The diner filled slowly around them, the Sunday morning crowd, the farmers and the families, the old men with newspapers. It was an ordinary Sunday in Silver Creek. It was completely, profoundly, irreversibly different from every Sunday that had come before it. 11 years, she said. With appeals, probably less, Jackson said. 7, maybe 8, with good behavior and legal pressure. That bothers you. Some, he said, less than it would have a year ago. No, a man who believed he was untouchable found out he wasn't. Whatever the number of years turns out to be, that's true either way. She drank her coffee. Ray's garage is booked out 3 weeks. I heard. Sandra called me last week. She's got a program starting at the development office for business owners who are facing regulatory challenges. She's going to help them understand their rights before they feel like selling is the only option. Victoria set her mug down. She named it. What did she call it? The bridge. A pause. She said everyone needs one, a bridge between where they are and where they can get. Jackson looked at his coffee. Something moved through his expression that he didn't put language on, and he didn't need to. What about you, he said. What's next for Victoria Dawson? She had thought about this. She had thought about it during the trial and after the verdict, And during the long, quiet evenings when Silver Creek settled into itself, and she could finally, for the first time in years, sit in her apartment and feel something that was not vigilance. I got a letter, she said, from a legal aid organization in Helena. They work with whistleblowers, help them navigate the process, connect them with investigators, support them through proceedings. She paused. They want me to come and talk to them about potentially working with them, using what I know. Jackson looked at her. What do you know? I know what it feels like to find something you don't want to have found, she said. I know what it feels like to be alone with it and not see a way forward. I know exactly which moment feels like the impossible one and why it isn't. She looked at her mug. I know that most people don't need someone to be brave for them. They need someone to show them that they already are. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. When do you talk to them? Next week. He nodded. He didn't say more than that. He didn't need to. Outside on Route 9, the morning moved along. A truck went by. A car turned into the lot. The coffee machine made its settling sound. The diner did what diners do, which is hold the ordinary life of ordinary people and ask nothing of them except that they show up and sit down and be fed. May came out of the kitchen with a pie that she set on the counter between them without explanation. Victoria looked at it. What's this for? She said. May looked at her steadily. Because you earned it, she said. And because I have wanted to make this pie for about a year and I was waiting for the right day. Victoria looked at the pie. She looked at Jackson. She looked at May. She looked at the diner full of Sunday morning people who mostly had no idea what the woman behind the counter had done, what she had carried, what it had cost her to carry it, and then to set it down in the right place. She picked up the serving knife and cut 3 slices. She put one in front of Jackson. She kept one for herself. She handed one to May. And in that unremarkable, ordinary, completely necessary moment, in a roadside diner on Route 9 in Silver Creek, Montana, with the coffee running and the morning filling up, and a man who had believed he owned everything, sitting in a federal holding facility, waiting for his appellate process to begin. Victoria Dawson was no longer hiding, no longer waiting, no longer measuring every word against the cost of saying it. She was simply there, fully, finally, completely there. And that, not the verdict, not the sentencing, not the 16 counts, or the appeals, or the careers that ended, and the businesses that were returned, that was the thing Ethan Caldwell had never been able to take from her because it had never been his to take. It had always been hers. She had simply needed to remember that she was allowed to keep it.